Hey, what's going on? Welcome to episode 98 of Boundary Break. I'm the host, She Says, and if you're new here, what I basically do is to take full control of the game's camera to show developer techniques, or in some cases left behind content, like in today's episode. Really quick, I just want to say an enormous thank you to Clockwork Pixel for doing this week's animated intro. He also did the animated intro for Boundary Break's Silent Hill 2 episode, so I'm so glad to have him back. And another enormous thank you to NecoRun for making this week's camera. And with that said, let's get going. So we get to start this off nice and early with a really cool discovery. Right at the very beginning of the game, where Heather wakes up inside of the cafe, you'll see the head of another customer that you never get to see the face of. Well, what if I told you that the head of that customer was an existing Silent Hill character? Now, this was really difficult for me to see because I can't turn the camera during cutscenes. It's just a limitation that we unfortunately had for this episode. However, thankfully the head did not despawn after a certain angle, and by slowing down the footage, you can see that the character who never shows up in Silent Hill 3 outside of this scene is Angela from Silent Hill 2. I love this right here. Check this out. There's always a lot of stuff going on outside the boundaries in the cutscenes. It's just really difficult to show you any of this stuff. However, over here with Detective Douglas, the camera is supposed to be pointing at his feet, but if you were to look at the full camera model, his right arm is just jettisoned outward, which I'm assuming is in a prefixed position for a part later in this scene where he reaches his hand out to Heather. So after you escape from the bathroom to get away from Douglas, you're out in this alleyway, and both of the alleyway's exits are blocked off with junk or a van. And what's cool is that when you move the camera, you can see a lot of texture that the player's never meant to see. Now, it's no skybox by any means, in fact, it's never used in the game, but this is still a pretty cool thing to witness if you've played this game several times and have only known the limited perspective of the sky texture. And before we even take off from here, I want to show you what it looks like when you go inside of the bathroom when it's not properly loaded. Instead, it's just the low detailed version before you step into the bathroom. I love stuff like this. In fact, Silent Hill 3 is filled to the brim with low poly stuff. There's this one scene that I'm going to show you right now where if you look outside the window, there are buildings and again, a sky. Now, taking advantage of that limited perspective that you, the player, has, the developers just made the outdoors like a separate room. One with buildings that aren't fully modeled and an enclosed sky area that's really, really small. So back on the subject of low detailed environments, inside the mall, there are a couple of storefronts that give you a window into what it's supposed to look like. And in every single case, if there is something for the player to see on the other side of the window, you get to see it, except for one store. For whatever reason, this store called Watch Christopher does have an environment on the other side of the door, but this storefront is completely opaque. So although there is something to see here, the players are never allowed to see it. Next up is a viewer request, and as always, you can follow me on Twitter if you want to make any suggestions for future episodes, as well as occasionally getting some previews. And this viewer wanted to know what it looked like on the outside of the subway. Dedicated viewers probably know how this one works. What happens is that the environment is moving, not the train itself. And at a certain point, a chunk of the environment warps its position out at the end of the track and is instead moved to the start of the track where it restarts its journey. Combine that with multiple chunks and it looks completely seamless to the player. How are we not going to see that town? You know which one I'm talking about. Silent Hill, of course. Now, what's cool is that the town in Silent Hill 3 uses the same assets from Silent Hill 2. You are, of course, barred off quite a bit in the third game, but the good news here is that I didn't show you these parts of Silent Hill in my Silent Hill 2 episode. So first off, I want to show you what it looks like zoomed out once again, which is that it loads in chunks. This is because, in all honesty, the Silent Hill franchise is not optimized really well. And why should you be, when one of the main features of the game is heavy, dense fog and really dark environments? You don't have to be fully optimized. So, working under those limitations allows the developers to do something quite like this, which you don't see in a lot of other video games of this era. Also, of course, because it's barred off, we all want to see how much environment is outside of those boundaries that the game sets up for you. Here's what you can see on the road where Heather says she doesn't need to go any further, and you'll notice that there's there's some signposts that you would never be able to see because the density of the fog doesn't allow you to. However, at the other dead end, there's even less to see. This one's completely barred off of a fence, which is kind of odd to me. You would think that they wouldn't bother doing that since they decided not to do that on the other roadblock. And also, before we take off and move on, I want to show you what the hospital looks like without any fog effects and maximum render distance. For whatever reason, this particular area was very buggy and crashed quite often when you tried to push it as hard as it could go. Now I want to talk about a couple things that aren't technically out of bounds, but they are really hard to see due to the limited scope of the camera in Silent Hill 3. The first is underneath this bed here. Now with the vanilla camera you can see just a little bit of this, but the developers modeled an entire dumbbell that's underneath this bed, as well as some boxes that are completely hidden underneath. But more importantly, when Heather's climbing up this ladder in what is probably one of the more interesting scenes in the game, there's something that the developers meant to show the player, but due to the camera angles, you never really get a good look at it. See, the camera just points at the bottom of a bed, and that's what's obstructing your view, but if you could see on top of the bed, you could see a tongue that is just slithering around, as well as some dirty syringes that are on this bed as well. And also, really difficult to read, but it does say, "What a wonderful world," against the wall here. Also, there's a doll that shows up in various rooms inside the hospital, but with camera manipulation, you can see that the doll has facial features that you never get a chance to see because it's always facing downward. Obviously, if you've played through Silent Hill 3, I think a ton of you want to know all about this. What does Harry Mason look like in this game? Because they never show you his face, which was a very odd creative choice, but his face does exist, just not his hair. And it's not like his hair was called out or anything like that, it just straight up doesn't have hair. Also, it looks like I can confirm that this is the James Sunderland head model. It's a little hard to tell because it's all bloodied up and dark, but Neko Run himself confirmed it as well through a character model extractor. Now, here's another viewer request, even though there isn't too much to show you outside of the fact that I can just break the illusion for you. The scene where Douglas is driving Heather to Silent Hill has a unique environment, and panning the camera out can show you that it's just rows of trees and nothing else. And unfortunately, it works in the same way that the subway does, where they're not really going anywhere in specific, at least in a technical aspect. The Resident Evil 4 episode is a completely different story. So I was asked repeatedly to feature the mirror room in this episode, and I figure why not? There isn't really anything that I can tell you as far as boundary breaking goes, other than the fact that some of you may have not known that the mirrored image in this room is actually a parallel plane, and not a true mirror effect that you'll see in some more modern games these days. So the idea of the character on the other side of the mirror, as well as the blood going in from one room to another, makes a lot more sense when you realize that it's not a true mirrored image. And well, outside of that, enjoy the mirror room from another perspective. Because I got a very specific request to do so, here's a close-up of Valtiel. Also bumped up the brightness and contrast for you so you can see all the details of the character. Also slowed down the footage for you so you could really soak it in. So let's take a look at Danny. At a certain point in Silent Hill 3, you go through a haunted house attraction that features Danny dropping from the ceiling. Now, Danny is supposed to be somewhat of a jump scare and spook the player, but taking the camera out of bounds can show you what's going on, and as you can see, Danny is wading up into the space, but his model seems to be all shaky and eager to get out there, I suppose. Also, because you can't get a good look at it with the vanilla camera, here's a close-up of what Danny looks like. And hey, why not? It's the month of October. Let's do a zoom out of the outdoor area of the haunted house. And lastly, we'll talk about the mannequin room. This was highly requested by a lot of people, and all they wanted to know was what happens off screen when the mannequin screams. Okay, that just sounded too similar. And when you head back, you see the head on the floor. Well, once you activate that trigger, there's no animation that leads from the head being on top to being on the floor. It just immediately goes straight to the floor.
So outrageous, tall.
Hey, Hey, what's going on, guys? So first things first, you have to check out Clockwork Pixel, the guy who did this week's animated intro, because he's phenomenal. I love his stuff. He actually did work for Stop Skeletons from Fighting, which is another great YouTube channel. So, you know, he's got a good pedigree going on, and you definitely should check out the links in the video description to see what else he's working on. So, dude, thank you so much if you're watching this. And also, Necron, thank you so much for making the camera, dude. He was supposed to be a guest in this episode, but unfortunately he was really busy. It's a shame, because I would love to have him on. But anyways, next week we're going to do a Zelda episode. It's going to be Spirit Tracks, so look forward to that if you're a Zelda fan. And then after that, it's episode 100, which no one has guessed yet what it's going to be. I'm really shocked, because usually the internet's, well, you know, there's like thousands of you. At some point, someone has to guess it right? I guess I'll just have to, you know, surprise you. But anyways, that's all I got for this week. I'm gonna go and shave this beard now because I'm starting to look like Robin Williams in Jumanji. So let me just go take care of this, and I will see you guys next week. Take care.